So I'm Ben. I'm the innovation lead for the design program at Innovate UK. My background is in industrial design, so trained in industrial design, and have been on a similar kind of journey to the one Ian was talking about before lunch, of progressing from designing things, physical things, and then digital things, and then the services around those physical and digital things, and then business models. So I've really kind of been on that journey and joined Innovate UK around about 3 years ago at the Technology Strategy Board, as it was at the time, to help them develop their strategy around design. What does this fuzzy thing called design actually mean to an organisation like Innovate UK? And to our business customers. So I'm going to start at the very end so that you know what I'm up here talking about. I'm going to talk to you about grants that we're offering to support businesses carrying out something called early stage human-centred design. And we'll talk a bit about what we mean by that. But first, a bit of context. So Innovate UK, it's nice that I don't have to do the usual big introduction to what Innovate UK is all about, because Kezia has kindly done a bit of that for us already this morning. We support businesses across the UK to innovate, not for fun, but because we want to accelerate economic growth for the UK. So it's really about the bottom line ultimately. And in that sense, when we talk about innovation, we're talking about something that on paper looks incredibly simple, like this. So you start out with a great idea, you implement that idea, and the cash comes rolling in. Isn't that wonderful? And indeed, a lot of the funding opportunities that we've offered in the past have targeted this model, in the sense that we'll put a theme out there, we'll invite people to come forward with their ideas for new products or services or technologies relating to that theme. And if we think those ideas are good enough, if we think they've got legs, we'll invest to help the business move them forwards towards commercialisation. But it does rather assume that you've got a good idea in the first place. And I think one of the things that we can kind of take from this morning is that there are lots of different ways and sources of inspiration and mechanisms that we can use to make sure that the ideas we're investing in are actually the right ideas and solving the right problems. So there's something that needs to happen before you have that great idea. And it looks something like this. And I apologise for showing you another process. Ian and Don made the very good point that sometimes you can box yourself into a corner by following a particular process too closely. But nevertheless, if this is something that's new to you, then it's useful at least to have a start point. So I mentioned we're offering funding for early stage design. So this is what we mean by early stage design. It's basically up to and including the point at which you know what the idea is that you want to develop, but before you actually push the button and invest lots of time and money in developing that idea towards commercialization. So it starts with gathering insight, the first part of that diamond process that a couple of people have mentioned, looking and learning, understanding how people really behave and what their motivations are. You know, I thought the slide earlier was excellent with the concrete pathways and then where people were actually walking. The way that people behave and their motivations for their decision-making process in the real world is often not what you think it might be. So you need to spend some time understanding the needs of the various stakeholders around your organisation. We always think about customers, we think about users, but actually the stakeholder map is generally much more complicated than that. It's not just customers and users, it's everyone that might interact with your business, with your products or services. So it might be the maintenance guys, it might be the installation guys, it might be logistics, it might be the people involved in the end of life material recovery, for example, if it's a product. So there's a real phase of kind of deep insight gathering that needs to happen, and then you need to filter that down very quickly into, okay, we've seen what's going on, what are the real problems that we can actually help people with that will give us a competitive advantage, that will actually potentially disrupt the market and help our business. So once you've got those statements, that's the point at which you can start the creative process of thinking, okay, well, what are the possible solutions that we could develop? And at that point, it's important to keep a very broad mind and explore a broad range of different possibilities. As was mentioned previously, this isn't a linear process, so generally once you've got some ideas you want to quickly validate them. It's also important to keep an eye on your cash flow. You're probably going to want to get something to market and get some money coming in as soon as possible, so don't just keep iterating forever until you get to what you think's perfect. You just need to get to something that's viable. So this is the one example of an early stage design process. Design has many different connotations, and they're all valid. This is not to say that design is this and only this. There are later stage design activities. Once you're actually into developing a particular product, you're going to need to look at design for manufacture, computer-aided design, styling of a product. We would consider those to be a bit more late stage, so once you've actually developed the idea. So that's one mechanism, and because we're Innovate UK, I like to use the letter I, so we've got insight, interpret, ideas, implement. If you're the design council or someone else, you might like the letter D, discover, define, develop, deliver. Guess what? It's kind of the same thing. The devil is in the detail, and the shape here gives you some idea of whether you're in a divergent or convergent thought process. Here's another one. Here, create, deliver. Discover, synthesize, build, test, evolve. Ad infinitum, you can just go onto Google and search for design processes and you'll find any number of lovely diagrams and maps, any one of which, if you tie yourself to it thoroughly, is probably going to cause you more problems than it solves, but it can be a very helpful framework to get you started, and it's really a case of you finding the process that works for you and understanding the motivation and the thought behind that process rather than just following it literally. So, early stage design, really we're talking about figuring out what it is that we should do before we do it. That's the early stage bit. I also mentioned human-centered. We want to fund early stage human-centered design. So what does that mean? You'll have seen probably diagrams like this before, and I know that the workshop activity we'll be doing this afternoon looks at this kind of model as well. So successful innovation needs to balance these various different, often conflicting needs. Technical feasibility, commercial business viability, and also desirability to people. Are you actually offering a product or service or an improvement that's beneficial to people, that answers a need that they have, that they can easily adopt into the way that they behave and leverage appropriately? So taking a human-centered approach doesn't mean just thinking about people and forgetting the technical feasibility, but it does mean that at this early stage of figuring out what you should do, set experience goals first and then technical requirements. So understand what it is that you want to deliver to people by way of an experience that's better for them than what's currently available. And then think about, well, okay, what technology, what technical performance requirements will we need to meet to deliver that quality of experience. Consider the quality of that experience when you're making your decisions. So it's quite common, it's just, I guess, human behavior that when we're trying to make big decisions, we tend to gravitate towards quantitative data. And often the information around, the insight that you have around human experience is a bit more qualitative, it's a bit more fuzzy, it's anecdotal. That's not to say it's any less important than the numbers on the spreadsheet. So when you're making decisions about what ideas to progress, how those ideas should perhaps be changed, which ideas you might want to just can, think not only about the numbers, but also think about, is it worth saving a little bit of money here if it's going to have a hugely detrimental impact on the quality of the experience? Can we spend a little bit more and deliver a much better experience that actually we could charge more money for at the end of the day? Validate desirability before developing the technology. So this follows on really from this idea of setting the experience goals first. Understand the kind of experience that your stakeholders would like, and then test that. And you can test that generally much more quickly and for much less money than it costs you to develop and test the technology inside the box. Often we get projects coming through the door at Innovate UK and people will be seeking funding to develop a very advanced technical prototype in order to demonstrate the viability of their great idea. And they'll have done that on the assumption that it actually meets a need, that people are going to want that if it works at the end of the day. And by the time you've gone through that process, that's generally quite costly. You've put a lot of time and money into developing the technology, proving that it works. At that point, you put it in front of some users and you discover that it doesn't really give them the quality of experience that you'd hoped for. At that point, it's really bad news and you don't want to hear it, and we tend to just kind of be blind to it. We put our heads in the sand and we keep going on regardless. So much better to even use a bit of kind of smoke and mirrors at this early stage to simulate how a product or service might work and get a feeling for whether actually is that the right thing to be doing before we kind of bet the house on it, as it were, and invest our money in making the technology work. It's important to do that because technology can make things possible. If you've got a new idea, technology can help you to make that idea a reality, but ultimately whether that idea succeeds in the marketplace comes down to people. And it's all about whether you understand the behaviour and the motivations of those people. So, very important. Equally, people don't buy technology, they buy what technology can do for them. If you bought a first generation iPod, it wasn't because of the clever piece of encoding technology that allowed them to get the digital file size down small enough. It wasn't because of the chip inside the iPod. It was because you wanted to be able to listen to your entire music collection anywhere you went with something the size of a cigarette packet. It's all about the benefits to the stakeholders rather than the technology inside the box. That's just the enabler. So, if you adopt this approach, we think, on the basis of lots of research by people much cleverer than myself, it could help your business to understand your customers' motivations and behaviour, and that's relevant, as was mentioned this morning, not only within perhaps the more obvious business-to-consumer markets, but even within B2B markets. Ultimately, you're still selling your product or service, you're selling an offering to people, and the people within those businesses are human beings. They're going to make decisions based on the kind of quality of experience they get from your business. It can help you to identify and tackle the right problems. I don't know whether storing half a lemon is an enormous problem for anyone in the room here today. Certainly for me, it's not really. I tend to just make a gin and tonic or use some cling film. I certainly wouldn't be inclined to pay, I'm assuming this costs more than 99p, for some pieces of injection moulded plastic to keep that half a lemon. It's probably not, it's a problem, maybe, but it's probably not a problem that people are going to pay a lot of money to solve. This process is also a great way to generate and quickly validate new product or service ideas. So as I mentioned, this is not really necessarily about demonstrating the enabling technology behind the idea, but it's a way for you to validate that actually the idea is worth doing. This image here is from Google, and it's a sketch of the first prototype for the Google Glass augmented reality glasses. And I stole this from a chap who was from Google and presenting to a room of engineers and innovators, and he asked the question of the room, how long do you think it took us to make the first prototype of Google Glass? And the answers came, a year, a few months. I think the lowest was a few weeks. But the answer was 2 hours, because they just used what they had available to them. They used a laptop computer, a piece of coat hanger wire, Pico projector that they bought off Amazon. And from that, you're going to get a sense of what it's like to have a screen projected in your field of view. How is that helpful to you? What are the problems that you might encounter with that? What's annoying about it? What works? What doesn't work? It's not the final solution, but it gives you enough of a sense of whether this is something that's actually worth you developing, and you can do it very quickly without spending a lot of money. That's very important. You don't need to develop the tiny little piece of technology before you've tested it. It can help you to derive competitive advantage through better experiences. If you're in a marketplace that's perhaps quite mature, or particularly in a lot of the digital markets that we see these days, the technical capability kind of comes easily. And you might find yourself on a fairly level playing field with competitors in terms of the technical functionality, the performance that you're delivering. In that case, how do you compete without having to squeeze your margins? Well, one way that you can do that is that you can improve the experience that you're delivering. So the technology, the performance might be the same, but you've developed something which is much more pleasant to interact with, to engage with, whether that's a product, physical, digital, whether it's a service, or whether it's actually the way that you do business with people. And it can help you to communicate your ideas more effectively, both to attract buy-in, perhaps within your own organisation, to help you create that vision that you can get everyone united behind, but also, and perhaps relevant to some of you in the room today, if you're seeking investment. This kind of clear, compelling communication of your ideas, not just, again, of the technology, but of the real benefit of the thing that you're developing. You don't need to make all this work at this stage, but you can use design to show how it will work and how it will make people's lives better and why your idea is worth investing in. So if this is such a great idea, why isn't everyone doing it? It's very easy to stand up on stage and talk about this kind of design process, and particularly as someone who's kind of lived and breathed design, I kind of take it for granted and think, well, it's just obvious, isn't it? And it's just common sense. Why wouldn't you talk to your customers? Why wouldn't you understand what their needs are? But obviously it's not quite as simple as that. One thing we need to bear in mind is that design isn't the answer to everything. I've presented a way of thinking that we think can help a lot of businesses to innovate more effectively. But there are great examples out there of technology-led innovation, where actually someone developed a technology without perhaps a very clear idea of the end use case, and it was picked up by someone and it was commercialized. So it's not the only route, but it's something to consider. And in fact, what do we mean by design anyway? There are clearly language barriers. Perhaps some of you already in the room have had your idea of what design means challenged this morning. Ian spoke very eloquently about the way that design has perhaps evolved over time and moved on from being just about the design of things to actually a thought process or a methodology, a way of behaving within your business. So there are some barriers around language. It's much easier to talk about this than it is to do it. Sometimes I say that design's easy. It's just as easy as getting out of bed in the morning, right? There's nothing practically difficult about that. Most of us, fortunately, are able to get out of bed under our own steam quite easily if we want to, put one foot in front of the other. But you perhaps all know it's not quite as easy as that, because actually you just need some real motivation to do it. So it's easier said than done. It needs the right conditions to thrive. It's very easy to do a great design project, follow all of those steps, pick the right process, and then for it to not go anywhere. How do you actually make sure that your ideas have got traction? Well, you need to have the right team, and that's where partnerships are obviously very important. You need to get the right experience on board. You need to get senior stakeholder engagement. You need to get the right people to buy into the project. Don, I think, talked about taking a slice through an organisation, picking the people that you need to have on board. You need to have an appropriate decision-making process that everyone's bought into. So again, coming back to this idea of considering the quality of the experience alongside the technical performance and the business viability. Tolerance of good failure. We've already heard about that today. Procter & Gamble actually have a heroic failure award for people that came up with great ideas in their organisation. Tata, the big engineering concern, also have a reward for people who tried things even if they didn't work. A willingness to challenge your assumptions and ideas. This is a kind of starting from first principles approach. So if you already have an idea of what you think the solution is, you probably need to be able to put that on the back burner at least and challenge it. And also, we've seen a bit that this can be quite an uncertain process. At the very start of this journey, you don't necessarily know what the solution is going to be. And so it can be very difficult to persuade others within your organisation or external investors that actually this is something worth spending money on. It's worth spending time and money going and watching what people do with our products and with our services in order that we can do something better, that we can innovate more effectively. it can be a bit of a leap of faith, so difficult to secure the money for that. We think that represents an opportunity for the UK because we think that many businesses could innovate more effectively and improve their business performance through the use of design. And with that in mind, we're running something called the Design Foundations competition, in which you could win up to 70% towards the grant of an early stage human-centered design project. I'll go through some of these details very quickly because the better probably if you're interested to come and talk to me afterwards. The projects need to be early stage human-centered design. Everything I've just talked about, they need to be at the right time point. They need to prioritise the human experience above the technical development, although you could obviously fund that through other Innovate UK opportunities. Although we're talking about partnerships today, applications for these grants need to come from a single UK business. But you can still collaborate. You can do that by bringing subcontractors on board. And we've raised the subcontracting limit in these projects to 70%. They're normally 30% or thereabouts in our competition. So you have a bit more leeway to subcontract, for example, design experts within your projects to get the best results. Total project costs should be between £10,000 and £60,000. If you want a bit more, up to £100,000, get in touch with us first. Explain why, and we can probably we can make a decision on that on a one-to-one basis. Projects need to last no longer than 6 months, basically finished by the end of the financial year. They can be in any industry or technology sector, and they can be any sort of design. So it can be related to physical or digital products, services, business models, etc. Once you're in scope, what makes your application stand out from anyone else's? Well, we're looking for a high standard of human-centered design expertise. So again, it's not just about following the process, it's about actually having people with experience of that process to take you through it and to make sure that you get the best quality outcomes from it. Projects that provide the best conditions for ideas to flourish. Again, so we know that having the right stakeholders on board is important. How are you going to address that within your project? We know that it's important to consider the next steps and what the appropriate outcomes of the project should be. So have you thought about that? I just said that one. Include planning and support for next steps. So we don't just want to fund design projects for the sake of funding design projects. We want them to lead on to commercial innovation. Rather a boring slide. The amount of money you can get depends on the size of your business. And 70% of the total cost can be spent on subcontracting, as I've mentioned. Again, talk to me afterwards if you want a bit more detail. I'm going to skip through this slide because I think I'm out of time and it's quite dull, but this is the complete process from application to starting your project. The important thing, first step, go to innovateuk.gov.uk, search for the word design and you'll find the Design Foundations competition. There are 2 documents. There's a competition brief and there is guidance for applicants. Read both of those documents. It gives you much more information than I've gone through today. Will help you to get an understanding of whether you're in scope and how the process works. And if you're actually interested, there's a bit of an initiative test, which is that you have to scroll to the bottom of that page to find the register and apply online link. Register your email address. That just puts you on our system. Doesn't commit you to making an application, but gives you access to the application form so that you can see what's involved. That is the application form, or the headings on it, which again, I'm going to skip over. Key dates, the competition's already open. Registration deadline is the 14th of June. As I say, registration is just about getting access to the various forms that you need. Application deadline, the important one, midday on the 21st of June. And we expect projects to start around about October, so there's a bit of a delay. By the time the competition's closed, we've been through all the applications, got the contracts in place, and so on. And a few links which I'll leave up there. So that's a quick overview.